From the News Channel 5 network, this is Inside Politics.
We have to recover. We can't close up our nation. We have to open our school, and we can't close up our nation, or you're not going to have a nation.
You know who I am. You know who he is. You know his character. You know my character. You know our reputations for honor and telling the truth. I am anxious to have this race.
Hello, everyone. I'm News Channel 5's political analyst Pat Nolan. Welcome to Inside Politics. With the presidential election now just over a week away, we add a new voice to our ongoing conversation here on the show about the race to the White House as well as the control of Congress in Washington. To bring his insights and wisdom, we welcome Joe St. George. He's the national political editor and Washington correspondent for EW Scripps, which is the parent company for News Channel 5. Joe, welcome to the program, and thanks for joining us.
Pat, it's good to be with you, and congrats on to Nashville. What a successful final presidential debate.
Yeah, it really was. I think Nashville and Belmont were in the national and the world spotlight Thursday night, and they hosted the second time for Belmont hosting the national debate. What were your overall impressions of what you saw during the debate here, and did any candidate come out with a particular advantage or hit a home run?
Well, you know, you and I were talking right before we hit the on-air button, and you're right. It's amazing what happens when the candidates actually follow the rules and a moderator is able to have control over the entire debate. I think it was a very substantive debate. People at home who may be undecided and considering to vote or not to vote, they at least got to hear and listen to the two candidates in at least a way in which they could understand the issues and perhaps make a decision. I think it was a win for the American people.
Kristen Welker, who was the moderator, took a lot of heat, particularly from President Trump before the debate, saying she wasn't not going to be fair. But it seems to me, from what I've heard, she got rave reviews from both sides of the aisle. It is good when you have a professional doing it, and also when she has some rules to help her, at least in terms of the opening statements, where one candidate at least had to be silent. It did seem they both were willing to do that, where they weren't the first time.
She benefited from the rules, and I think she also benefited from also being a White House correspondent. I mean, she has seen President Trump day in and day out for the last 4 years, so it's not as perhaps as intimidating as when an anchor might come in and they may only see a president a couple times over a 4-year span. So hats off to the whole Commission on Presidential Debates. A solid discussion.
You're at the White House. You see President Trump. Did you get the Leslie Stahl treatment, or are you treated more like Ms. Welker?
Well, you know what? I think that the president, when I've had a chance to interview President Trump, and, it depends on the day, I think, in talking with journalists who have worked with the President of the United States. It depends on the attitude that perhaps he has going into the interview. If you watch the leaked version of the 60 Minutes interview that the president released, it was clear from the beginning that he did not like the combative nature, and the interview lasted 40 minutes, and by the end of the 40 minutes, he was tired of it all. It was definitely a unique interview, to say the least.
A lot of people thought that last night's debate for President Trump was his last and perhaps best chance to tighten up the race. Did he do that?
Well, you know what? I think it was actually an amazing performance by both candidates. I think if you were a Trump supporter last night, you loved how President Trump conducted himself, and that you love how he was able to land a few punches on the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden. At the same time, if you were a Democratic supporter out there, you loved Joe Biden's performance. A lot of people have been saying that was Joe Biden's best debate performance ever in his entire political career. Now, that being said, if both candidates had good nights, it likely means the debate was fought to a draw. And if you look at the trajectory of the race, the polls in this race, a draw favors Joe Biden at this point.
A lot of people thought that, at least the president's people thought that if Joe Biden had more chances to talk, he'd make a mistake. I don't think anybody saw a big mistake, but the president seemed to think that Mr. Biden's comments about ending the nation's use or reliance on fossil fuels might hurt him in the battleground states, and we might see a late ad from places like Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. What do you think?
I certainly think it impacts Pennsylvania. I don't necessarily think it impacts all the battleground states, because oil and fracking is not as big of an issue, for instance, in Arizona. Very limited fracking goes on in Arizona. But it also impacts Texas. It likely impacts some of those competitive House races the Democrats are hoping to flip in places like Texas. Texas was always a long shot for Democrats to begin with in this race. But that's what the president believes was a big moment. Joe Biden, obviously, the Democrats believe he was able to land a lot of punches on tax returns, on immigration. So, like I said, I think both candidates fought the debate to a draw.
President Trump went after Joe Biden pretty hard a couple of times about his own and his family's business deals. That's been a little bit of a strange story. Lots of big charges, but not a lot of veracity necessarily behind some of the background from that, where it came from. Did that work, or did you have to watch Fox News to understand exactly what he was talking about, at least who the players were?
Well, you got to look at the different audiences that the candidates are trying to appeal to. If you are a fervent Trump supporter out there, you know all about the Hunter Biden story. You've listened to it on conservative talk radio. You've listened to it on Fox News prime time. You know this story, and you were happy to see the president go after him. If you're a Democrat out there, you're thinking, my goodness, there is a lot of this story that has not been corroborated, and the Congress of the United States has not addressed or touched this topic. And Joe Biden had a chance to then pivot and say, well, what about your business dealings? What about your interactions with other countries? What about your tax returns? And any time that Joe Biden could pivot back to tax returns, Democrats believe that's a winning issue.
And also, is President Trump bringing this up because he wants to try to knock down the favorability numbers for Joe Biden, which are higher than what Hillary Clinton's were 4 years ago?
It's been really the biggest challenge for President Trump. The biggest difference, there's a lot between 2020 and 2016, but the biggest difference are those favorability ratings for the Democratic nominee. In 2016, political analysts like yourself, myself, everybody in Washington, we didn't quite truly appreciate how unpopular Hillary Clinton was to the American electorate. But that is not the case with Joe Biden. Sure, he has negatives. Sure, there are plenty of people who don't like him, but just not quite to the level of Hillary Clinton. And that could ultimately be the reason that Joe Biden is sworn in as president of the United States come January.
In terms of the overall accuracy of the polls is another thing that people sort of look at, the polls in general, look back between 2016 and 2020. Right now, most of the national polls seem to show Biden was somewhere around an 8% lead in terms of the national polls, maybe a little smaller margins in the battleground states. So that's an awful lot like what Hillary Clinton looked like in October of 2016. Is it the same kind of race when President Trump came back and won that? Can he do it again this time, or why won't he be able to?
Well, I'll say this to anyone watching, don't pay attention to the national polls, because I think even Trump supporters are admitting that the president has a very low chance of winning the national popular vote this time around. That being said, they believe that the president could pull off the magic number. The magic number is, of course, 270 electoral college votes, and that's by just getting enough supporters in key parts all around the country. A place like Kenosha County, Wisconsin, which was decided by 255 votes 4 years ago. Is the president able to win a place like Kenosha County, Wisconsin again? I mean, we'll find out in short order, but they obviously believe that the Republicans believe they have a path to 270, while they may not have a path to the popular vote.
Joe St. George, who's the national political editor and Washington correspondent for the E.W. Scripps Corporation, which is the parent company for News Channel 5. He's our guest on Inside Politics. Back to continue our conversation after this break.